Most of you.
Yeah, most of you. Those assholes.
Those guys. I guess, so I had the pleasure of seeing the movie a couple days ago for the first time. And I'd love to start at the beginning. I'll just dive us right in. Can you talk to me about how you first became aware of Gary and how this movie came to be? Because obviously you wear so many hats in this film. How did this happen? How did you do it?
Okay. We actually have our producer in the room, Michael Costigan from Aggregate. I'm not sure. There's Michael right there. Michael is the one who actually called me early on in the pandemic and said, "Have you read this Texas Monthly article called Hitman?" And I said, "No." Well, he sent it to me, and I read it immediately and was like, wow, this is a really compelling guy. This is a really compelling character. There's a lot to unpack here. And then, we started I kind of told him what I thought my entry point would be, and then we talked about who the filmmaker might be. And then we both, when I said Richard Linklater, we both lit up and we're like, oh my gosh, there's nobody better with character or story and somebody who can kind of just add authenticity. When you look at a guy that's as complicated as Gary Johnson, I think there's very few filmmakers that could ground somebody who kind of contains so many multitudes. And when we brought Rick on board, I think that's really where Rick added his Rickness and really.
Tell us more about Rickness.
The Rickness. I used to call him Rickipedia when we were shooting Everybody Wants Some, because he just kind of knows everything about everything. But the Rickness, sort of is really, I think, the essence of Gary. I think the pontificating professorial sort of guy who can find sort of those those little gems. The way Rick talks in general is a very meandering, very Gary. He kind of bounces the ball up in the air. Even just his voice is sort of buoyant, and I find that it was really interesting. The two hemispheres of our brain, I think, really fit really well together on this movie and made it just a joy to watch. And I feel like Gary and Ron really, it's a very interesting ballet of Rick and myself, I think.
So obviously you guys worked together before.
Yes.
When did you first meet? And can you talk a little bit about how your relationship has evolved? I mean, what is it like to work with him both as a director and a co-writer? How does he wear those hats differently? How do you wear those hats differently?
Yeah, I think, so Rick and I actually first met, I was 14 years old in Austin, Texas, and I shot a movie called Fast Food Nation. And Fast Food Nation, I have basically like one line on the movie. But I remember Rick was so kind and so cool. I shot the scene with Paul Dano. We actually caught up about that recently. We worked together when we were 14. And then we really carved our process on Everybody Wants Some, which is sort of the spiritual sequel to Dazed and Confused, a movie I really love and I'm really proud of, and really the rest of the cast, I feel like you guys used me to kind of lob ideas at Rick. I felt like I really had Rick's brain in an interesting way. I felt like we were kind of in sync and in line, so guys would kind of come to me and be like, hey, I have this bit, and we kind of were like, I don't know if Rick's gonna like that, or we kind of float things around, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Q. But I felt like that's where Rick and I started developing a really interesting partnership where I think he saw where I was coming from, and I could understand the map that was in his head. I think a lot of actors come at a movie sometimes from the actor's point of view, not the movie's point of view, and I felt like I could always kind of see what Rick was going for. Then I think we were always kind of looking for stuff together, and then when I gave him this, it really felt like a natural process. It was during the pandemic, and we just kind of just kept talking on the phone and talking about our favorite movies, Double Indemnity and Body Heat, and some of these things that, and just kind of the need for something. I think it also started more on the Ron side rather than the Gary side. I think the Gary stuff was such an interesting, it was so apparent in the article, and you knew that there was going to be this pontification, but I think the Body Heat element was what we were really excited about. This idea of a guy who had always, talked about humanity but never participated in humanity. And because of this woman who brought him, you know, from id to ego, you know, you got to see a guy who kind of doubled down, and because he was pretending to be human, he actually became human. So that was how I pitched Rick initially, as I said, what if we took Tootsie and we applied it to Gary Johnson? You know, what if we had a guy who was essentially, you know, Tootsie, a misogynist who puts on the clothes of a woman, who ends up becoming a fully developed, you know,
at one point actually
man.
does.
Yes, and it becomes a woman and then ends up respecting women and seeing the point of view. What if we apply that to a man who essentially, with understanding humanity, he studied humanity, but he wasn't participating in it, and by being stuck in this identity of a man who represented passion and represented all these things that are very human, that was flawed and dangerous and sexy and confused and conflicted, all of a sudden you find a new Gary Johnson on the other side. So I think that resonated with Rick, and I think that was sort of the leaping off point for us.
How do you know, as somebody who also produces and acts, I sometimes struggle to balance those two things. Obviously, you really have to trust your collaborators to be able to put an acting hat on when you need to and to be able to deliver a performance like this. How do you balance those things? I mean, obviously, writing and producing and acting in this, what was that experience like for you, and how do you find that balance? Are there parts of it that you enjoy or that felt different on this project compared to others that you've worked on in the past?
It was interesting on
Parts
this
that were
one.
tougher?
Yeah, I think the wonderful part is I was surrounded by people that protected me from the problems I needed to know about, and then I think that's what good producing is that you're protected from the problems that don't matter, and then you're brought into the ones that do. But I think on a bigger level, I've now realized, sort of as an actor, the kind of actor I want to be, which is holistic. You know, I don't like to be segmented to one thing. I like to participate. I like to build, and you know, the Texas phrase, grow your own food. You know, I like to, you know, kind of understand like what I'm building and what I'm building towards, and not just feel like I'm a talking prop within the greater whole. You know, I like to have a little bit of a footprint. So yeah, the process with Rick has really kind of changed my point of view, I think, on making movies with folks moving forward. It's been really fruitful.
Is there a specific way in which you felt like you were taken care of by him in this process? Is there an example that you can think of that made you feel like this feels different, is going to change the way that I do things moving forward?
Well, in this movie, all the characters that I play, Rick didn't get to see those until I performed them on set. That's a lot of trust. And I remember because I knew he was nervous about it. We just didn't have time.
How did you know that he was nervous?
He's like, you know, we should look at those characters beforehand. He's like, well, we gotta handle this rewrite first, and we gotta do this, and we gotta do this. I was like, great, we gotta handle casting. We gotta, you know, get this location. You gotta go, you know, meet the mayor or whatever it is, you know, to get your locations. And all of a sudden we got to game day, and Rick's like, you got it? I was like, yeah, I think I got it. I think we'll see. You know, you just throw shit against the wall and you see what sticks. But my favorite part was I was on set one day when I was playing Tanner, like the redneck guy with the missing back teeth.
My favorite one.
So such a fun character. I was talking to Rick, and Rick literally interrupted the conversation. He goes, "Where's Glenn?" And I go, "I'm Glenn, man." So I was literally kind of, I would come out in character. Like I'm not like a method, you know, guy, but on those days, I promise I don't take myself seriously. I would come out of the van, and I would be full on until we ended the scene in that character. And so
And
Tanner,
he bought it.
What?
I said, and he bought it.
And he bought it. So I got to fool the man himself, which was good. So, yeah.
I mean, speaking of, I guess I'm curious how did you craft each of these characters? If it was something that you hadn't seen up until that day, what was your approach to all of the different versions of Gary / Ron / Tanner / you know, how did you differentiate them from each other?
Well, I think the fun part about this movie, and again, this is sort of the antidote to the normal Hitman movie, is that, you know, because Hitmen don't exist, because it's a fantasy, you get to really play pretend. You know, you get to really have fun, and a lot of these characters came from the real debriefs and the real research that I got from Texas Monthly and Gary Johnson. They sent all these records over, so I got to listen to the real life Gary Johnson play a couple of these things, and some of these things are directly from Gary. And then the other parts of it are just getting to, again, play pretend. You look at who you're sitting down with and you go, what would they want to see? And how do you embody it? And so, you know, I get to, and then you also have to differentiate them and also show seams in the performance, because it's still Gary playing these guys. You know, they're not perfect performances. And a lot of these people that are, you know, hiring hitmen are not exactly neuroscientists. You know, they're not. You know, it's so funny even listening to these debriefs and hearing the people that are hiring, where it's almost like they're talking themselves into it as it's happening. They want to like so believe in the hitman that it's so fascinating. It's almost like Gary doesn't even need to do too much. So it was really fun about, creating those characters was really fun. And I think the wish fulfillment of the movie and sort of what we were trying to explore, which is that we all kind of contain these multitudes. We all kind of contain all these different gears and access, you know, these parts of ourselves that we want to kind of explore. And I liken it to when I was a kid and I used to watch movies, and you walk out of a kung fu movie and you feel like you want to fight everybody, or you walk out of a car racing movie and you just drive faster, or you walk out of a romance and you just want to fall in love. And sort of, it's those sort of gears that we all contain, and we're not all one thing. And sometimes as we progress in life, sometimes we end up finding ourselves backed into a corner. And I think that was sort of what the pandemic was about, is a lot of people kind of waking up and realizing they were not the version of the person they wanted to see in the mirror. They were maybe not with the person they wanted to be with, and it kind of taught you it's never too late to be the person you want to be.
Speaking of all of those different genres you talk about, it's clear that this film, I mean, it was an extraordinary vehicle to watch you reach into all different pockets of your ability as an actor, as a producer, as a co-writer. But you know, you talk about the romance movies, the heist movies, the action movies, the car chase movies. It felt like this movie was made by people who are students of so many of the genres. You guys are balancing so many different pieces of them. Can you talk a little bit about how you found that balance? Because it's such a tonally singular film, and it feels like you guys are pushing at the boundaries of these genres, but also figuring out how to put them in conversation with each other.
By the way, that's a fantastic question, and I really appreciate you saying that, because that was something we talked about constantly, is the tonal tightrope. That when you're making a movie that has romance, like, you know, and we're not just making romance, like, I think we're Richard Linklater's first sex scene ever, which is a strong badge of honor. I also find that sometimes, is that one clap? Always like that guy, and he's always in the back. I find that it's so interesting when you look at all the, you know, it's a Vitamix of all these different genres, you know, that we're playing with, and I feel like sometimes those things go really wrong, but it takes a filmmaker like Richard Linklater, who has played in every sandbox. He's played in every genre, and that's really where you just feel secure, as you go, okay, as long as I'm playing this thing authentically, he's going to do that tonal tightrope. And on the page, all we did was just try to entertain each other, make each other laugh, and just make sure we allowed for buy-in, like you had to buy into the legal stuff. We had New Orleans Police Department there, and we had to know that all of this stuff was plausible, and what was fact and what was fiction, and we really tried to only be fantastical deliberately, and tried to make everything really feel as grounded as humanly possible. But again, I just attribute it to Rick, because he's one of the greatest filmmakers we have, and again, to be in the sandbox with a guy who's played with all gears, knows how to navigate them, you just feel safe.
Did you, I mean, one of the hardest things it feels like in balancing this tone, did you find that you stuck pretty true to what you guys had written in the script, or did you find a lot of that tone and the balance of it in the edit?
I would say that the script was pretty much the script. I think one of Rick's greatest attributes is he's a great listener. And so his process, and this is one of the coolest process, I mean, I know there's a lot of filmmakers in here, what he does and this is, we carved this on Everybody Wants Some, which is, on Everybody Wants Some, we went to Rick's Ranch, and we played baseball for 2 weeks, we watched movies for 2 weeks, we read the script, and all we did was hang out, and you cast bond, and you read the script. I think we read them like 3 times a day. And what you end up doing is he said, don't feel don't feel constrained by the lines, take ownership of the role, do all these things. And what you end up doing is you find that every actor ends up taking ownership of the character, and then you find that actors end up being really natural and really good and really effortless because they do take ownership of stuff. And we brought that same approach into this movie where every actor got to sit around my table in New Orleans, and we just read through the script until everybody was like, okay, this is the script, good. And then you pretty much stick to it. And the fun part about Rick's movies is they feel so, everybody's like, is there a lot of improv? There's no improv. You're sticking to the punctuation at that point. Everybody sort of agreed upon it. And so those days become really fun because no one's fighting, no one's having those sort of things that you see sometimes on set where you get to set and everybody's like, I don't know if this is the scene. And you're like, what? Like, and
everyone gets comfortable and the air's through and the crew's like, are we going to make it home for dinner?
It's the worst because it's like not respectful to the crew. It's not respectful to anybody's time. And you sit there and you're like, you should have had these conversations ahead of time. And everybody wants to get home to their family. And I find my favorite part of working with Rick is the crew shows up and you are ready to perform for the crew. You are fired up, everybody knows their mark, everybody's ready to hit it, and it's a great performance. And it's always fun because you're just like, you show up and you get to play because you're not loaded with questions or anxiety. You're really there to have fun. And that's what I think makes a great set, and that's what makes Richard Linklater so singular.
I mean, you can feel that chemistry with this entire cast. You have this amazing ensemble cast. Can you talk a little bit about how you found everyone? And obviously you talked a little bit about how you all work together, but how did you find everyone? These are some of my favorite actors, and it was so fun to see people who I wouldn't normally think of as being in a film like this together.
Well, Adria Arjona was a great discovery to me. Our Madison in this movie, who
has some amazing chemistry.
I mean, she's incredible. I mean, and that was like, when we found Adria, I mean, it was like the heavens opened, because that was a role that we knew you really had to bring Gary from his left brain to his right brain in such an extreme way. A guy who was so binary and so logical in everything he did. You had to believe that he would sacrifice all of it for the attention of this one woman, and just on a gut, just on a feeling. And Adria was such a gift because as an actor, you know, like there are some roles that they have to be a Swiss Army knife, right? They have to. It's not one attribute that she has to play. She has to play all these different things, and you have to, even when she's doing kind of despicable things, you're looking at her like, is she behind it? You have to like root for her, and you have to believe in her humanity and the fact that she's truly torn in these places. And Adria just adds humanity to this role that it would go wrong in so many other places. So I mean, and she was also so integral to the writing process. So I give Adria a lot of credit for what I think really makes this movie tick in that way. One of the craziest casting stories is the guy that plays Rex's husband. Is a guy named Evan Holtzman, who absolutely crushes it in this movie. Evan is one of my best friends. But Evan auditioned for this thing fair and square, and he sent in a tape, and I watched this tape, and I was like, damn, this is a good tape, dude. I was like, you crushed it. And Rick looked at his tape, and he's like, this guy's really good. And I was like, I think he's really great. I couldn't be the one to tip the scales. So he goes, I really like this guy. I think this is the dude. And I was like, yeah, I think he's really good. I think he's really good. and so he goes, I think we should bring him in for a chemistry read.
With you?
With me. So I was like, sure. And so I told Evan, I was like, can I stay with you? And I was like, you can. I was like, we probably have to leave separately or do whatever. I was like, I don't know how we're gonna pull this thing off. So Evan ended up staying with me, and then he met me at the firehouse where we're holding all the auditions, And then he showed up, and I said, hey, we do not know each other. I want you to win this thing fair and square, but I can't.
Gary.
I went full Gary. So Evan came in, and I introduced myself to Evan. He crushed the audition. He nailed it. Rick looked at me. He goes, wow, he's really good. I go, yeah. and he's like, I think he's the guy. I was like, I think so, yeah. And so Evan got the role fair and square, but yeah, that was a performance on a performance.
How did you reveal this to Rick?
Like slowly. I didn't want to betray his trust. And he's like, is this how everybody got cast in this movie? And then Retta and I worked on a movie together years ago, and Rick worked with her on a PSA, and we both she's just an immense talent. She can just make a meal out of anything. And Austin Amelio, who plays Jasper, was also in Everybody Wants Some. And we actually wrote that role with him in mind. We actually, he was always the guy. And I think it's just Austin's sense of play, the way that he can kind of be, we called him, that's terrible, we called him Matthew McConaughey when we were on just a little skinnier Matthew. But but Austin is one of those guys that can truly, again, he's got this sense of play that you need for that character. We need that character to just chew scenery and be demented but grounded, and have a good point,
Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey, exactly. So, just Austin delivered in spades. So, yeah, I love him in this movie.
I'm so curious. The ending caught me so by surprise. What do you think happens to Gary and Madison? What happens to them?
Well,
they just eat pie together for the rest of their life?
Speaking of, there's a pie out there waiting for all of you guys, if anybody's hungry. One of the things that Rick and I, what was kind of one of the entry points to this entire movie was, what if the person that you met in PTA, in the Parent-Teacher Association?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I don't have kids. Parent-Teacher Association is like that this was their love story, right? The idea that, you always meet, that person where they're like, yeah, we met at this weird, party in the hills, and you're like, what does that mean? And then, they have kids and they go on and do their own thing, and everybody has sort of a wild past, and we were like, what if their past was the wildest? And what if this is these two people end up kind of completing each other in this beautiful way? And we sort of got to reverse engineer that. We thought it could be kind of the entry point to a beautiful love story. I don't know where it goes from there, but I'm sure they lived happily ever after. Until somebody makes a podcast about them, and then it all unravels.
Canceled.
Yeah.
Perma canceled.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
What
you.
a treat.
I really
And thank you guys.
So fun to do.
Such a feat, and honestly, I'm so thrilled to have seen it and to be able to be here with all of you. So thank you.
Of course, thank you.